Hello, I'm Cassandra Reeves. My parents said I was damaged goods, too broken, too haunted, too unstable after my tours overseas to ever be trusted with responsibility. They'd whisper about my episodes at family gatherings, called me unemployable, even removed my name from the Veteran Support Foundation I helped establish when I returned home. I let them for years, until the day I walked into the executive suite they thought they controlled and handed them both termination papers with "Merry Christmas" written in red ink across the top. But here's the part they never saw coming. What would you have done if your own mother introduced you as our daughter who's still figuring things out, while cashing donor checks meant for veterans like me? Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And more importantly, would you have stayed silent like I did, or would you have spoken sooner? It was nearly 6:30 on a Tuesday evening when I pulled into the parking lot of Patriot Partners Foundation. The December air in Virginia bit through my thin blazer as I killed the engine and sat there, watching employees stream out of the glass-fronted building. Normal people with normal jobs heading home to normal lives. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The scar above my right eyebrow had faded to a thin white line. You could barely see it unless you knew to look. The rest of my scars weren't visible under my clothes. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother, Marcus. "They're still in the conference room. Quarterly donor meeting. Don't chicken out." I didn't respond. Just slipped the phone into my pocket and stepped out of the car, my boots crunching on the thin layer of snow that had fallen earlier. The limp I'd worked so hard to correct was barely noticeable now, but the cold made my right knee ache where the shrapnel had torn through. Another invisible battle scar from my second tour. The security guard at the front desk, Wilson, according to his nameplate, glanced up as I entered. "Building's closed to the public, ma'am." I handed him my old military ID. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted him to see it. "I'm here for the donor meeting in the Valor conference room." His eyes flickered with recognition, not of me, but of what the ID represented. "Third floor, end of the hall." He passed me a visitor badge without asking any more questions. Some courtesies were still extended to those who had served, even by those who hadn't. The elevator smelled like pine-scented cleaner and coffee. I watched the numbers light up, 1, 2, 3, and tried to steady my breathing the way my therapist had taught me. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. By the time the doors slid open, my heart rate had almost returned to normal. The hallway stretched before me, carpeted in navy blue with framed photos of veterans, receiving support, standing proudly with their families, succeeding against the odds. None of the photos were of me, though I'd been the first success story of Patriot Partners Foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Voices drifted from the partially open door at the end of the hall, my father's booming baritone dominating as usual, my mother's softer tones interjecting occasionally with practiced charm. I paused outside, watching, through the crack. "The expansion into the West Coast market is already exceeding projections," my father was saying, gesturing to a PowerPoint slide displaying an upward trending graph. "By this time next year, we expect to have offices in San Diego, where the military presence gives us access to an untapped donor base." 12 people sat around the polished conference table, nodding appreciatively. Board members and major donors, all dressed in business attire that probably cost more than a month of a veteran's disability pay. And at the head of the table, my parents, Richard and Eleanor Reeves, co-founders and executive directors of Patriot Partners Foundation, wearing twin expressions of cultivated benevolence. My mother spotted me first, her perfectly plucked eyebrows lifted slightly, the only indication of surprise on her Botox-smoothed face. "Cassandra," she said, cutting off my father mid-sentence. "We weren't expecting you." Every head turned. My father's smile tightened at the edges as he recalibrated. "What a pleasant surprise. Everyone, this is our daughter, Cassandra. Not Captain Reeves, not co-founder, just daughter." I stepped into the room, feeling the weight of their stares, some curious, some pitying, all assessing. I was used to being evaluated. Military life had taught me that much, but this felt different. These civilians weren't judging my fitness for duty or my ability to lead. They were wondering why I was there at all. "Good evening," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I hope I'm not interrupting." My father cleared his throat. "Not at all. We were just discussing the Foundation's expansion plans. Please, take a seat." He gestured to an empty chair near the door, the furthest point from where he and my mother sat. I remained standing. "Actually, I came to drop off some information I thought might be relevant to your donor meeting." I pulled a USB drive from my pocket and placed it on the table. "It's a comprehensive analysis of veteran support outcomes over the past 5 years, with recommendations for program improvements." My father's expression didn't change, but I caught the flash of irritation in his eyes. "That's thoughtful, Cassandra. We'll certainly review it later." "I think you'll find it illuminating," I continued, maintaining eye contact, "particularly the sections on financial transparency and administrative overhead." A slight murmur rippled through the room. My mother stepped in smoothly, her social graces unflappable as always. "Cassandra has always been passionate about veteran advocacy," she told the group with a practiced smile. "Ever since her experience in Afghanistan." Experience. As if I'd gone on a semester abroad instead of commanding a forward operating base under daily mortar fire. An older man at the table, silver-haired with a Marine Corps pin on his lapel, looked at me with newfound interest. "You served?" Before I could answer, my father interjected, "2 tours, infantry support." Downplaying. My role as usual. Cassandra had to take an early discharge for medical reasons. Medical reasons. A sanitized way of saying I'd been medevaced out after an IED took out half my squadron and left me with a traumatic brain injury that had taken 18 months of rehabilitation to overcome. The older man nodded respectfully in my direction. "Thank you for your service, Captain." He'd recognized my rank without being told. A real veteran could always spot another. "Richard," my mother said, placing a manicured hand on my father's arm. "Perhaps we should wrap up the formal presentation. I'm sure our guests would appreciate moving on to dinner." Translation. "Get Cassandra out of here before she says something uncomfortable." "Of course," my father agreed readily. "We have reservations at the Capitol Grill in 20 minutes. Cassandra, will you be joining us?" The question was perfunctory. We all knew the answer he expected. "Not tonight," I said. "I have other plans." Relief flickered across my mother's face. "Another time, then," she said, already turning away to gather her designer handbag. The meeting dispersed, board members and donors filing past me with polite nods. The Marine Corps veteran stopped briefly. "If you ever want to talk shop," he said quietly, handing me a business card, "give me a call. Thomas Brennan." I glanced at the card, CEO of Sentinel Security Solutions, before tucking it into my pocket. "Thank you, sir." When the room had emptied except for my parents, I remained standing by the door. My father sighed, straightening his already immaculate tie. "Was there something else, Cassandra? We're on a tight schedule." "Just curious about one thing," I said. "Have you told the board about the Westlake acquisition yet?" My father froze momentarily, then recovered. "I don't think that's any of your concern." "Interesting," I replied, "because from what I hear, it's a $13 million investment of foundation funds into a for-profit venture. Seems like something the board might want to know about." My mother's smile tightened. "Cassandra, darling, you've been listening to rumors again. This is exactly why we've tried to shield you from the business side of things. In your condition—" "My condition," I repeated flatly. "You mean my fully recovered, medically cleared, extensively documented condition?" "We only want what's best. For you," my father said, using the same tone he'd used when I was 12 and hadn't made the honor roll. The foundation is under control. Our control. Focus on your recovery instead of stirring up trouble. I looked at them both, the parents who had once been proud of me until my brokenness became inconvenient to their narrative, and felt something inside me harden into resolve. "Merry Christmas," I said as I turned to leave. "Enjoy your dinner." I was nearly at the elevator when my mother called after me. "Cassandra? Perhaps it would be better if you didn't mention your concerns to Marcus. He's under enough pressure with the year-end reports." I didn't turn around, just stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on her worried face. My brother already knew everything. He had been my eyes and ears inside Patriot Partners for months now. Outside, the snow was falling harder, blanketing the parking lot in silent white. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and took another deep breath. Phase 1. Complete. I'd let them see me, let them underestimate me one more time. Tomorrow, I would begin dismantling everything they thought they owned. I didn't drive straight home that night. Instead, I headed toward the industrial district on the outskirts of town, where the streetlights grew dimmer and the buildings more utilitarian. My headlights cut through the falling snow, illuminating the weathered sign of a place I hadn't visited in nearly 3 years. Veterans Haven. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just a converted warehouse with a small parking lot and a flagpole flying both the American flag and the POW MIA flag beneath it. But inside those plain walls, more actual healing happened than in all the glossy brochures my parents' foundation produced. I parked next to a salt-covered pickup truck and sat there for a moment, gathering my courage. This place held memories, some painful, some transformative. It was where I'd first gone when the nightmares got so bad I couldn't sleep for days. Where I'd met other veterans who understood the weight I carried without me having to explain. Where I'd finally started to believe I might have a future beyond my trauma. The front door opened before I could knock, and Sergeant Major James Cooper stood there, his broad frame filling the doorway. He'd aged since I'd seen him last, more silver in his close-cropped hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his posture was still military straight. "About time you showed your face around here, Captain," he said gruffly, but his eyes were kind. "Get in here before you freeze." The main room was just as I remembered it. Mismatched furniture arranged in conversation circles, a coffee station against one wall, a bulletin board covered with job postings and resources. A Christmas tree stood, in one corner, decorated with dog tags and handmade ornaments. A few veterans looked up as I entered, then returned to their conversations, respecting the unspoken code. No questions unless offered. "Coffee?" Cooper asked, already moving toward the pot. "Please." He poured 2 mugs and led me to his office. A small room with a desk that had definitely seen better days and walls covered with unit photos and citations. He closed the door and gestured to a chair. "So," he said, settling behind his desk, "you finally ready to talk about what happened?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "Which part? The IED? The hospital? The foundation?" "All of it. None of it. Whatever you need." Cooper had never been one to push. It was why veterans trusted him. I took a sip of coffee, buying time. "I've been planning something, Coop. Something big." He didn't look surprised. Figured as much when Marcus started asking all those questions about foundation bylaws and board governance. Of course he knew. Cooper had always seen more than he let on. "My parents have been misusing foundation funds," I said simply, diverting donations meant for veteran programs into for-profit ventures. Using our stories to raise money, then spending it on executive salaries and awareness campaigns that are really just tax-deductible vacations. Cooper's expression darkened. "Been hearing rumors. Didn't want to believe it. I've documented everything. Bank transfers, shell companies, inflated administrative costs. They've been at it for years. since before I even came home. I paused, feeling the familiar twist of betrayal. They used my injury as a fundraising tool while simultaneously telling everyone I was too unstable to be trusted with foundation business. While you were still in the hospital? I nodded. They had a whole campaign. Support our wounded warriors like Cassandra. My face on mailers I never approved. They raised millions. Cooper's jaw tightened. And how much of that went to actual veteran support? Less than 30%. The rest? I gestured vaguely. Administrative overhead, consulting fees to companies they own, real estate investments. He was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question I'd been asking myself for months. Why now, Captain? You've known this for a while. I set my mug down carefully. 3 weeks ago, I found out they're planning to close Veterans Haven. The building, the programs, all of it. His eyes widened slightly. This building is owned by the foundation? Through a subsidiary, yes. They're planning to sell it to developers for a tech campus. The paperwork is already drawn up. I pulled a folded document from my pocket and handed it to him. 40 veterans will lose their support network. 12 staff members will lose their jobs. Right after Christmas. Cooper unfolded the paper, AI property assessment with development plans attached, and skimmed it silently. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. What do you need from me? Information. Names of veterans who've been promised help from the foundation and didn't receive. Staff who've noticed funds disappearing. Anyone who's tried to raise concerns and been shut down. He nodded slowly. I can get you that. What's your play here, Reeves? I hesitated, then decided Cooper deserved the whole truth. I've been buying shares in the foundation's parent company through a private investment firm. Quietly, through different channels. As of last week, I own 46%. Combined with Marcus's shares and proxy votes I've secured from other veterans on the board, I'll have controlling interest by Christmas Eve. Cooper let out a low whistle. Where'd you get that kind of capital? Remember the logistics software I developed during rehab? The one that helps track medical supplies in combat zones? I allowed myself a small smile. The DoD licensed it last year. 8 figures. My parents have no idea. Because they never bothered to ask what you were working on, Cooper finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. They assumed I was playing video games. Digital therapy, my mother called it. The memory still stung. They were so convinced I was broken that they never considered I might be building something. Cooper leaned back in his chair, studying me. And once you have control, what then? I clean house. Every executive who knowingly misused funds, gone. Every program that doesn't actually serve veterans, cut. Full audit, complete transparency, new leadership. Your parents won't go quietly. No, I agreed. They won't. He was quiet for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Been keeping my own records. Discrepancies, complaints, programs announced but never implemented. 3 years' worth. He slid it across the desk. Thought someday someone would listen. I took the folder, feeling its weight, the weight of broken promises and diverted resources. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This gets ugly. There'll be blowback. Foundation donors pulling out, programs losing funding temporarily, veterans caught in the middle. I've thought of that, I said. I have contingency funds set up. No program serving veterans will be interrupted. Cooper studied me for a long moment. You've changed, Captain. Had to. Still carrying those medals I gave you? My hand automatically went to my pocket, where 2 purple hearts sat wrapped in a handkerchief. Not my medals. Those were in a box at home. But the ones Cooper had earned in Vietnam and given to me when I was at my lowest. Always. Good. He stood, signaling our meeting was ending. because what you're about to do takes as much courage as anything you did overseas. Maybe more. As I drove home through the thickening snow, Cooper's words echoed in my mind. I'd faced enemy fire, led soldiers through hostile territory, survived an explosion that should have killed me. But confronting my own parents, revealing their betrayal to the world, stripping them of the power and prestige they'd built on the backs of wounded warriors, that would take a different kind of bravery. At a red light, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had never lost faith in me. "Did you see them?" Marcus asked without preamble. "Yes. And?" "They have no idea what's coming." My brother's sigh carried through the speaker. "Last chance to back out, Cass. Once we start, they're closing Veterans Haven, Mark, selling it to developers. Right after Christmas." Silence, then a soft curse. "Mom and Dad always did have a gift for timing," he finally said. "Okay, I'll have the financial reports ready by tomorrow. Everything you asked for." "Be careful. If they suspect—" "They won't," he interrupted. "They still think I'm the obedient son, remember? Too busy climbing the corporate ladder to question where it's leaning." After we hung up, I sat at the intersection long after the light turned green, watching snowflakes melt against my windshield. 3 years ago, I'd returned home broken in body and spirit, trusting my family to help me heal. Instead, they'd used my brokenness to advance their own agenda while pushing me into the shadows. They never expected me to step back into the light. They never expected me to fight back. They should have remembered. I was trained never to leave a man behind. And my parents had left behind hundreds of veterans who deserved better. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my resolve had hardened like steel tempered in fire. Christmas was 17 days away. By then, Patriot Partners Foundation would have new leadership, new purpose, and my parents would finally understand exactly what they had dismissed as damaged goods. Morning light filtered through the blinds of my small home office, catching dust motes as they danced in the still air. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., old habits from deployment that civilian life hadn't erased. My desk was covered with printouts, financial reports and bylaws that Marcus had smuggled out of the foundation over the past months. Fragments of my parents' betrayal laid bare in black and white. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the fatigue of a sleepless night. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't bother making more. The evidence was damning, more so than even I had suspected. Foundation funds had been systematically diverted through a complex web of subsidiaries and consulting fees, all leading back to my parents' personal holdings or their close associates. Veteran programs that existed only on paper. Testimonials from veterans who had never actually received services, their stories fabricated or exaggerated for marketing materials. My phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "Executive meeting called. For 10 a.m. Dad seems agitated. Want me to record it?" I typed back. "Yes. But be careful." 3 sharp knocks at my front door pulled me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and few people knew where I lived. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Thomas Brennan, the Marine Corps veteran from yesterday's board meeting, stood on my porch, looking up at the security camera I'd installed above the door. Military habits die hard. I'd known he'd notice it. I opened the door but remained in the threshold. "Mr. Brennan, this is unexpected." He nodded respectfully. "Captain Reeves, may I come in? What I have to discuss shouldn't be said on a doorstep." I hesitated, then stepped aside. Brennan entered, his gaze sweeping the room with the practiced assessment of someone who had operated in dangerous environments. His eyes lingered briefly on the folded flag in a display case on my mantel, not my own, but one that had draped the coffin of my squad leader, Staff Sergeant Michaela Rodriguez. I kept it as a reminder of promises made. "Coffee?" I offered, more out of convention than hospitality. No, thank you. He remained standing until I gestured toward the living room. We sat across from each other, the morning light casting half his face in shadow. "I'll be direct, Captain," he began. "I know what you're doing." My face remained impassive, though my pulse quickened. "And what would that be, Mr. Brennan?" "Thomas, please." He leaned forward slightly. "You're building a case against your parents and preparing for a takeover of the foundation. I'm here to offer my assistance." I didn't confirm or deny, just watched him carefully. "Why would you do that?" "Because my nephew was one of the veterans your parents promised housing assistance to after his medical discharge from the Marines. He waited 8 months while they processed his application, lost his apartment, ended up living in his car." Brennan's jaw tightened momentarily. "By the time I found out and got him proper help, he'd developed pneumonia that nearly killed him. The story wasn't new to me. I'd heard dozens like it, but each one still pierced my armor of detachment. I'm sorry about your nephew." "Don't be sorry. Be effective." Brennan reached into his jacket and withdrew a thumb drive. "This contains financial records of transactions between Patriot Partners and several shell companies over the past 5 years. Companies that exist only on paper but somehow received millions in consulting fees." I took the drive but didn't immediately plug it in. "How did you get this?" "When you've been in private security as long as I have, you develop certain skills and connections." He met my gaze steadily. "Let's just say I've been conducting my own investigation since my nephew's experience. I was planning to take it to the FBI until I saw you at that meeting yesterday." "And now?" "Now, I think perhaps justice would be better served by someone who understands what veterans have lost through this fraud." He gestured to the drive. "That's a copy. I have the originals secured." I turned the small device over in my hand, calculating risks and possibilities. "Why trust me with this? You barely know me." "I know your record, Captain. 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star with Valor. The ambush outside Kandahar where you led 3 wounded soldiers to safety despite your own injuries." He paused. "I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest at the mention of Kandahar. "That information isn't public. I served with Colonel Hayes before he retired. He speaks highly of you." Hayes had been my commanding officer, the one who'd recommended me for the Bronze Star, the one who'd visited me in the hospital when my own parents were too busy with foundation business. "What do you want in exchange for this?" I asked, military, directness taking over. "3 things, Brennan said, counting them off on his fingers. "First, guarantee that Veterans Haven remains open and receives proper funding. Second, ensure that my security firm gets a fair chance to bid on any protection. Contracts for foundation events. No favoritism, just a fair process. Third," his expression softened slightly, "I want to see Richard and Eleanor Reeves face consequences for what they've done." The first 2 requests were reasonable. The third aligned perfectly with my own intentions. "I can agree to those terms." "Good." He stood, our business apparently concluded. "There's one more thing you should know. Your father called me this morning." My spine stiffened. "About what?" "He wants to hire Sentinel Security for a sensitive internal matter. Said the foundation might have a disgruntled former employee causing trouble." Brennan's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. I told him I'd consider it. The implications were clear. My father suspected something and was preparing countermeasures. "What did you decide?" "I'm accepting the contract," Brennan said, surprising me. "Better to have someone on the inside who's actually on your side. I'll know their defensive moves before they make them." It was tactical thinking, the kind that kept soldiers alive in combat zones. "Thank you." Brennan moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Captain. Your parents have friends in high places, politicians, media. Be prepared for this. To get very public and very ugly. I'm counting on it." I replied. After Brennan left, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing this unexpected alliance. Then I plugged the thumb drive into my laptop and began reviewing its contents. The information was explosive. Detailed records of wire transfers, bogus invoices, even emails between my parents discussing how to restructure veteran programs to free up funds for other ventures. One email from my mother made my blood run cold. The Cassandra situation continues to be useful for fundraising. Donors respond to wounded warrior narratives, especially when it's family. Schedule another photo shoot when she's having one of her better days. We need updated materials for the holiday campaign. I'd never authorized any photo shoot, had never seen the materials they'd created using my trauma as a marketing tool. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound I'd sustained. My phone rang. Marcus. The executive meeting just ended, he said without preamble, his voice tight. It was about you. I straightened. What about me? Dad thinks you're becoming unstable again. Said you made veiled threats about the Westlake project yesterday. He's instructed HR to draft papers removing you from the foundation board, citing medical concerns. I had expected retaliation, but not this quickly. What was the vote? 4 in favor, 2 abstentions, including me. I said I wanted to speak with you first. And the others agreed to this? Marcus's bitter laugh carried through the phone. They agreed to whatever Dad wanted, like always. Jenkins actually suggested they might need to consider a conservatorship if your erratic behavior continues. Said your TBI history could justify it. My hand tightened around the phone. A conservatorship would give them legal control over my finances and potentially my medical decisions. It was an extreme measure, usually reserved for individuals truly incapable of managing their own affairs. They don't have grounds, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. They're creating grounds, Cass. Dad mentioned. Documenting concerns about your behavior over the past year, retroactively building a case. It was a classic Richard Reeves tactic, rewriting history to suit his narrative. They can't do this. They're doing it, Marcus said grimly. The removal papers will be filed tomorrow. They're moving quickly because of the Westlake timeline. The deal closes January 2nd. My mind raced, recalculating timelines and strategies. We need to move up our schedule. How? We don't have full control yet. The proxy votes can be secured sooner, I finished. I need you to call an emergency board meeting. Use your position as CFO. Cite financial irregularities that require immediate attention. They'll block it. Not if you have evidence that suggests criminal liability for board members who ignore it. I glanced at Brennan's thumb drive, which you will have within the hour. Marcus was quiet for a moment. This is going to destroy them, Cass. They made their choice when they decided to exploit wounded veterans for profit. My voice was cold, even to my own ears. When they decided to use my injuries as a fundraising tool while simultaneously declaring me unfit to have any say in how that money was spent. I know, he said softly. They're still our parents. The pain in his voice reminded me that Marcus was caught in the middle of this battle in ways I wasn't. He'd continued working at the foundation, watching our parents' corruption, firsthand while feeding me information, torn between family loyalty and doing what was right. You can still walk away, I offered, though I hoped he wouldn't. Keep your hands clean. I can do this alone. No. His voice strengthened. I'm with you. I'll call the meeting for Friday morning. 2 days from now. Earlier than I'd planned, but necessary given my parents' accelerated timeline. Send me everything you have on the board members, personal and professional vulnerabilities, conflicts of interest, anything we can use. Already on it, Marcus said. And Cass, watch your back. I've never seen Dad this rattled before. After we hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street where my neighbors were going about their normal lives. unaware of the war I was quietly waging. My father was a formidable opponent, calculating, connected, and utterly ruthless when his interests were threatened. He wouldn't hesitate to destroy me to protect himself. But then, I was my father's daughter in at least one respect. I had learned how to fight battles others thought unwinnable. The difference was, I was fighting for something beyond myself. Returned to my desk and began preparing for Friday's confrontation. My parents thought they were dealing with a broken soldier still fighting old battles. They were about to discover I'd learned new tactics for this particular war. Thursday morning dawned with an unexpected snowfall that blanketed the city in pristine white. I watched it from the window of my apartment, remembering how snow in Afghanistan had been different, harsher somehow, with winds that cut through even the heaviest gear. Here, it fell in gentle silence, muffling the usual morning sounds of traffic and commerce. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. A text from Cooper. "They're here. Black SUV, tinted windows, 2 men in suits." I'd been expecting this. My father rarely handled his problems directly. He preferred to outsource the uncomfortable parts of business. I texted back, "Don't engage, just observe." "Roger that," Cooper replied, followed by, "They're talking to some of the veterans, asking questions about you." Predictable. My father was building his case for my removal, collecting statements about my instability from people who knew me. What he didn't realize was that the veterans at Haven would sooner chew glass than betray one of their own. I dressed carefully, charcoal gray pantsuit, white blouse, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional, controlled, the opposite of the unstable veteran my parents were trying to portray me as. No military insignia or hints of my service. Today I needed to be seen as a businesswoman, not a wounded warrior. My phone rang as I was fastening my watch, a standard timepiece, not the tactical one I preferred. The screen showed unknown caller, but I answered anyway. Captain Reeves. The voice was familiar, Thomas Brennan. "I thought we established first names," I replied, checking my appearance one last time in the mirror. "Habit," he said. "I have information you need before today's meeting. Your father hired additional security, not through my company. 4 men, private contractors with military backgrounds. They've been instructed to escort you from the premises if necessary." My jaw tightened. "Are they armed?" "Not with firearms. Your father's not that stupid. But they're trained. If they get physical, it won't be gentle." I'd faced worse odds in combat, but this wasn't a battlefield. It was corporate warfare, with different rules and different weapons. "Understood. Thank you for the heads up." "One more thing," Brennan continued. "Your mother's been making calls to board members since dawn, spinning some story about your mental health deteriorating, saying this meeting is evidence of paranoid delusions." Of course she was. Eleanor Reeves had always been the emotionally manipulative counterpart to my father's cold calculation. "Are they buying it?" "Some are. Hamilton and Peterson seem solidly in your parents' corner. Greaves is wavering. The others are waiting to see evidence before committing." "Then we'll give them evidence." I checked my watch. "I need to go. The cars will be here soon." "Be careful, Captain," Brennan said. "Your father's desperate, and desperate men make dangerous choices." I ended the call and gathered my materials. 3 identical folders containing the most damning evidence, one for each board member who wasn't already compromised. Not the complete file. That would come later. Just enough to ensure they couldn't claim ignorance once the full truth emerged. A knock at my door announced the arrival of my small but crucial support team. Marcus entered first, looking tired, but resolute in his tailored suit. Behind him came Dr. Anita Patel, the neurologist who had overseen my rehabilitation, and Jamie Wilson, a former JAG officer who now specialized in nonprofit law. "Ready for this?" Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the materials laid out on my dining table. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, handing him one of the folders. "Did you secure the proxy votes?" He nodded. "Ramirez and Chen are on board. Combined. With our shares and Brennan's, we have 52%, assuming everyone votes as promised." "They will," I said with more confidence than I felt. Board politics were always unpredictable, and my father was a master at last-minute maneuvers. "Doctor." Patel stepped forward, her expression serious. "I've reviewed your recent medical evaluations, Cassandra. There's absolutely no clinical basis for the concerns your parents are raising. Your cognitive function tests are within normal ranges, in some areas exceeding pre-injury baselines. Will I?" "You testify to that if necessary?" I asked. "Unequivocally," she replied. "What they're attempting is not only unethical, but potentially illegal, using false medical claims to remove you from your position." Jamie cleared her throat. "Speaking of illegal, I've prepared injunctions in case they attempt to force a psychological evaluation or implement any kind of conservatorship without due process." She handed me a folder of legal documents. "Sign these now so we're prepared." As I signed the papers, Marcus paced by the window. "Dad's bringing the full executive team to the meeting. They've been told it's about restructuring before the Westlake acquisition." "Good," I said, signing the last document. "The more witnesses, the better." We traveled in separate vehicles to the Foundation headquarters, a precaution against any attempt to delay or intercept us. I arrived first, pulling into the executive parking garage 20 minutes before the scheduled meeting. As expected, 2 unfamiliar men in dark suits stood near the elevator, their posture and alertness marking them as the security my father had hired. I approached directly, making eye contact. "Gentlemen, I believe you're expecting me. Cassandra Reeves." They exchanged glances, clearly surprised by my forthright approach. "Ma'am," the taller one acknowledged with a slight nod. "Your father asked us to escort you to the meeting." "How thoughtful," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "That won't be necessary. I know the way." The shorter one stepped forward, blocking my path to the elevator. "We insist, ma'am." I held his gaze. "Are you physically preventing a board member from attending a scheduled meeting? Because that would create significant legal issues for both you and whoever instructed you to do so." Uncertainty flickered across his face. These men were hired muscle, not lawyers. They hadn't expected to be challenged on the legality of their actions. "We have our orders," the taller one said, but with less conviction. "And I have mine," came a voice from behind us. Thomas Brennan approached, 2 of his own security team flanking him. As the contracted security provider for Patriot Partners Foundation, my team will escort Ms. Reeves to her meeting. The standoff lasted only seconds before my father's hired men backed down. They couldn't challenge Brennan's authority without revealing they were operating outside official channels. "Smart choice," Brennan said as they retreated. Then, to me, "Ready, Captain?" The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the controlled chaos of a corporate crisis in progress. Staff hurried between offices, speaking in hushed tones. Phones rang unanswered. The tension was palpable. My father's executive assistant, Nancy, who had known me since I was a teenager, looked up in surprise as I approached the boardroom. "Cassandra, we weren't. That is, your father said you might not." "Might not what, Nancy? Attend a board meeting I'm legally entitled to participate in." I kept my voice gentle. Nancy wasn't the enemy here. She flushed slightly. "He said you weren't feeling well." "I'm feeling fine," I assured her. "Better than I have in years, actually." The boardroom door was closed, but I could hear my father's voice through it, his tone carrying the practiced authority he used when setting expectations. Completely unacceptable behavior, of course, but we need to handle this with discretion. Cassandra's condition makes this delicate from a PR perspective. I pushed the door open without knocking. The conversation halted abruptly as all eyes turned toward me. My father stood at the head of the table, one hand flat against the polished surface, the other frozen mid-gesture. My mother sat to his right, her expression shifting quickly from surprise to concerned sympathy, a mask she wore so naturally it had taken me years to recognize it for what it was. "Cassandra," my father recovered quickly. "We were just discussing my condition?" I finished for him, stepping fully into the room. "Yes, I heard. Fascinating topic, considering my doctors have given me a clean bill of health." The 7 board members seated around the table displayed varying degrees of discomfort. 2 wouldn't meet my eyes, Hamilton and Peterson already in my parents' pocket. Reeves, the wavering vote Brennan had mentioned, looked conflicted. My mother rose gracefully. "Darling, we're all concerned about you. These accusations you've been making. The way you've been behaving. It's so unlike you. Is it?" I set my briefcase on the table. "Or is it unlike the version of me you've been presenting to the board?" My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Cassandra, this isn't the time or place for the truth?" Marcus interrupted, entering the room with Dr. Patel and Jamie Wilson. "I disagree, Dad. I think it's exactly the time and place." A flash of betrayal crossed my father's face as he registered Marcus's presence on my side. He hadn't anticipated this alliance, had always assumed his son's loyalty was assured. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," I said, opening my briefcase, and extracting the folders I'd prepared, "is an emergency board meeting called by the CFO to address financial irregularities within the foundation." I nodded to Marcus, who took over. "As Chief Financial Officer, I've uncovered evidence of systematic misappropriation of funds, false reporting to donors, and program fraud," he stated, his voice steady despite the tension. My mother's concerned. Mask slipped, revealing a flash of cold anger before she composed herself again. "Marcus, honey, what are you talking about? You've reviewed all our financials yourself." "Yes," he agreed. "I have, including the ones kept in separate books for the shell companies receiving consulting fees for services never rendered." The room went silent. Board member Reeves leaned forward. "What shell companies?" "Western Dynamics, Helios Consulting, and Potomac Strategic Group," I answered, sliding folders toward the 3 board members who weren't yet compromised, all receiving substantial payments from foundation funds, all listing Richard and Eleanor Reeves as beneficial owners. My father slammed his hand on the table. "This is preposterous. Cassandra is clearly having another episode. Marcus, I don't know what she's told you, but I've seen the evidence myself," Marcus cut in. "Generated the reports, tracked the money. It's all there." As the board members began flipping through the folders, my mother tried a different approach. "Even if there were some accounting irregularities, bringing this to the board rather than discussing it privately is highly inappropriate. This is family business." "No," I said firmly. "This is foundation business. Donor money meant for veteran services being diverted to private ventures. That's not a family matter. It's fraud." The next 2 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed battle, with accusations met by denials, evidence countered by deflection. Dr. Patel presented her medical assessment, dismantling my parents' claims about my mental fitness. Jamie outlined the legal implications of the financial mismanagement documented in our reports. Throughout it all, I remained calm, focused, letting the evidence speak for itself. This wasn't about revenge, though that motivation simmered beneath the surface. It was about justice for the veterans who had been promised help and received empty words instead. By mid-afternoon, the tide had turned. Board member Reeves, the wavering vote, finally spoke up after hours of careful listening. "I think we need a full independent audit and temporary leadership change while this is investigated." My father's face had gone from flushed with anger to pale with realization. The carefully constructed empire he'd built was crumbling under the weight of his own deception. I move that we suspend Richard and Eleanor Reeves from their positions pending investigation, Greaves continued, and appoint interim leadership immediately. The vote was 5-2 in favor, with only Hamilton and Peterson remaining loyal to my parents. As my father absorbed the outcome, his expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. He leaned toward me, voice low enough that only I could hear. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "This isn't over." I met his gaze steadily. "No, it isn't. The audit is just the beginning." As the meeting adjourned, my mother swept past me without a word, her perfume lingering in the air between us. My father followed, pausing at the door to deliver one final warning. "Remember who taught you to fight, Cassandra. I know all your moves before you make them." But he was wrong. The daughter who had left for war and the woman who had returned were different people. And the battle that had begun in this boardroom would end in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. Because while Richard Reeves had taught me strategy, Afghanistan had taught me survival, and I had learned both lessons well. The weekend passed in tense calculation. I barely left my apartment, working through contingencies and preparing for my parents' inevitable counterattack. They might have been suspended, but Richard and Eleanor Reeves had built their empire on relationships, with donors, politicians, and media figures. They wouldn't surrender it without deploying every weapon in their considerable arsenal. By Sunday evening, their first move became clear. My phone lit up with notifications as a story broke in the local business journal. Family feud at veteran charity. Troubled daughter stages coup against founder parents. The article painted me as unstable and vindictive, quoting sources close to the family, who described my ongoing struggles with PTSD and inability to adjust to civilian life. My military service was mentioned only in the context of my injuries, framing me as damaged and volatile. The foundation's work was portrayed in glowing terms, with my parents cast as selfless champions for veterans whose reward for their generosity was betrayal by their own daughter. I read it twice, noting which board members had declined to comment, and which had offered tepid statements of confidence in the foundation's leadership, carefully worded to avoid specifying which leadership they meant. The article concluded with a quote from my father. "We only want what's best for Cassandra and for the veterans we serve. We hope this unfortunate situation can be resolved quickly and quietly." Quietly. Of course, that's what he wanted. Sunlight was the one thing their corruption couldn't survive. My phone rang. "Marcus. Have you seen it?" he asked without preamble. "Yes. They've kicked me out of my apartment." His voice was tight with suppressed anger. "Changed the locks while I was at the gym. Security wouldn't even let me get my clothes." The apartment was technically owned by a foundation subsidiary, one of many ways my parents kept their children dependent on them. "You can stay with me," I offered. "Already headed there," he replied. "But that's not all. They've frozen my accounts, not just at the foundation, but my personal accounts too. Dad must have called in favors at the bank." Ice settled in my stomach. If they could reach Marcus's accounts, mine might be next. "Get whatever cash you can from an ATM. I'll do the same. We need to assume they'll try to cut off our resources." "Too late for me," he said bitterly. "Cards already declined." "I have emergency cash here," I assured him. "We'll figure it out." After we hung up, I immediately transferred funds from my main account to 3 separate smaller banks where I'd established accounts under my consulting business. Then I called Thomas Brennan. "They're moving faster than expected," I told him after explaining the situation with Marcus. "We need to accelerate our timeline." "Agreed," Brennan replied. "But be prepared. They've hired Westlake PR to manage their crisis communications, top-tier spin doctors, the same firm handling the Westlake acquisition. Not a coincidence. Can you get someone inside?" "Already working." "On it," he said. "How's your operational security?" "Military grade," I answered, glancing at my laptop. Encrypted drives, secure communications. Marcus is more vulnerable. He wasn't expecting them to move against him personally. Family makes. For complicated battlefields, Brennan observed. What's your next move? I looked at the Business Journal article again, noting the carefully crafted narrative. They're controlling the story. Time we told our version. The media won't be easily swayed. Your parents have cultivated these relationships for years. We're not going to the media, I said. We're going directly to the people my parents have been exploiting, veterans. Cooper's organizing a meeting at Veterans Haven tomorrow night. Every veteran who's been promised services by the foundation and left hanging will be there. That's risky, Brennan cautioned. Your parents could spin it as you manipulating vulnerable veterans for your vendetta. Let them try, I replied. A plan forming. Meanwhile, I need access to the foundation's donor database. The complete one, not the sanitized version they show the board. Marcus doesn't have it? Only my father has full access. It's kept on a separate server. Brennan was silent for a moment. I might have a way in. Give me until morning. After we ended the call, I sat in my darkened living room, listening to the occasional car passing outside. In Afghanistan, night. Operations had always been the most dangerous. Limited visibility, heightened tension, the constant awareness that death could come without warning. This felt eerily similar. A text from Cooper appeared on my phone. Your parents' guys were back today, taking photos of the building. Asked a lot of questions about our finances. They were building their counterattack, looking for vulnerabilities. Veterans Haven operated partly on foundation grants that could be rescinded if my parents reclaimed control. I texted back, make sure everyone knows about tomorrow's meeting. It's crucial we have numbers. Already on it, Cooper replied. Word spreading, veterans looking after veterans. Marcus arrived an hour later, his expression a mixture of anger and exhaustion. I fixed him a sandwich while he showered and changed. Into clothes I'd bought him when he'd stayed over during a snowstorm last winter. They called Mom's brother, he said, settling onto my couch with the sandwich. Uncle Stephen is filing a petition tomorrow claiming we're both suffering from shared delusion disorder. They're trying to get a judge to order psychiatric evaluations. I'd anticipated this tactic. Jamie's already prepared our response. Dr. Patel has agreed to testify about my cognitive function. We'll need to find you an independent evaluation as well. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. How did we not see who they really were all these years? We saw what we wanted to see, I replied, the truth of it settling heavily between us. What we needed to see. They were our parents. And now? Now they're opponents in a battle they started, but will finish. I handed him a burner phone. Use this from now on. Assume your regular phone is compromised. He took it, studying it for a moment. You've planned for everything, haven't you? Not everything, I thought. No battle plan. Survived first contact with the enemy. That was military strategy 101. As much as possible, get some rest. Tomorrow we take this public. Monday dawned gray and cold, with a forecast calling for more snow by evening. I woke early, checking the secure message server Brennan had set up. A file waited there. The donor database, extracted. Overnight through means I didn't ask about. I downloaded it immediately, then woke Marcus. We need to go through this before tonight's meeting, I told him, setting up 2 laptops at my dining table. Look for patterns. Donors who gave large amounts but don't appear in the annual reports. Donations earmarked for specific programs that never materialized. We worked methodically through the morning, building a spreadsheet of discrepancies. The picture that emerged was worse than even I had suspected. Millions in donations had been diverted through accounting tricks, reclassified or simply disappeared into administrative black holes. Dad always handled the high-net-worth donors personally, Marcus murmured, highlighting another suspicious entry. Said it required the founder's touch. Now I understand why. My phone buzzed with a text from Jamie Wilson. Petition filed by Stephen Reeves. Emergency hearing scheduled for Wednesday. Need you both to meet with me ASAP. I showed Marcus the message. You go. I need to finish this analysis before tonight. Are you sure? This hearing could be a distraction to pull us away from our main objective. I finished. Jamie can handle the legal response. We need to focus on building our case with the veterans and donors. Marcus left reluctantly, taking the burner phone and a file of medical records that might help counter our uncle's petition. Once alone, I continued working through the database, freezing when a familiar name appeared. Senator William Gardner, chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. The entry showed a $250,000 donation earmarked specifically for a PTSD treatment program, a program I knew had never been implemented despite being heavily promoted in foundation materials. More troubling was a notation in the processing column. Per RR, reallocate to Westlake Preliminary. My father had diverted a senator's donation, meant for PTSD treatment, to his real estate venture. If Gardner discovered this misappropriation, the fallout would extend far beyond our family drama. I was still processing this discovery when my secure server pinged with a message from Brennan. PR offensive launched. Check local news. Prepare for blowback. I switched on the TV to find my mother being interviewed live, her expression the perfect blend of parental concern and professional composure. Deeply worried about Cassandra, she was saying. The trauma she experienced in Afghanistan affected her more profoundly than anyone realized. We tried to help her transition by including her in the Foundation's work, but her paranoia and conspiratorial thinking have only worsened. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. And these accusations of financial impropriety? Completely unfounded, my mother replied without hesitation. Every dollar we raise goes to helping veterans, which makes these attacks especially painful. The Foundation's work is too important to be derailed by personal issues. That's why we've asked for independent oversight until this situation is resolved. The camera cut to my father, standing with a group of suited men I recognized as business leaders who frequently attended Foundation events. We've established an emergency response team to ensure services to veterans continue uninterrupted, he announced, his voice grave with manufactured concern. We won't let those who served our country become collateral damage in a family disagreement. The message was clear. They were positioning themselves as the responsible adults protecting veterans from my dangerous instability, and they were using the very veterans they had exploited as human shields. My phone rang. Cooper, are you seeing this? He demanded. Yes. It gets worse. They just pulled our funding, effective immediately, sent some lawyer with paperwork claiming evidence of mismanagement at Haven. We have 30 days to vacate the building. The attack was strategic, cutting off a key ally and potential meeting place in one move. Where are the veterans who were staying there going to go? Cooper's voice hardened. They're not going anywhere. We're not leaving without a fight. No, I agreed. We're not. Can you still host the meeting tonight? Damn right we can. Already called every veteran I know. Place will be packed. This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. My parents weren't just defending their position. They were scorching the earth, willing to hurt the very people the Foundation claimed to serve in order to maintain control. By late afternoon, a steady stream of texts and calls confirmed what I already knew. My parents were systematically undermining everyone associated with me. Vendors who had worked with my consulting firm received calls questioning my stability. Veterans who had supported me were contacted with offers of expedited assistance if they distanced themselves from my unfortunate situation. The most brutal attack came just before I left for Veterans Haven. A voice message from Dr. Patel, her usual calm replaced by quiet fury. They're challenging my medical license, Cassandra. Filed a complaint with the medical board alleging I falsified your cognitive assessments. My hospital privileges have been suspended pending review. I'm still with you, but I wanted you to know what we're dealing with. I sat in my car, listening to the message twice. This wasn't just a family. power struggle anymore. My parents were destroying lives to protect their fraud. The cold calculation of it settled something inside me. Any lingering doubt, any residual loyalty, burned away in the face of such deliberate cruelty. As I drove toward Veterans Haven through the beginning flurries of the promised snowstorm, I made a decision. We would no longer fight defensively. Starting tonight, we would take the battle directly to my parents, exposing every lie, every betrayal, every exploitation they had perpetrated. Christmas was 10 days away. By then, Richard and Eleanor Reeves would no longer control Patriot Partners Foundation or anything else. The veterans they had used as props and fundraising tools would reclaim the resources meant for their recovery. And my parents would finally face the consequences of their actions. The only gift I planned to give them this holiday season was the truth, wrapped in accountability and tied with the bow of public exposure. Veterans Haven was transformed when I arrived that evening. The usually quiet space hummed with energy as dozens of veterans filled the main room, spilling into adjacent hallways. Cooper had arranged chairs in concentric semicircles facing a small podium, creating an intimate forum where everyone could be seen and heard. The Christmas tree in the corner, with its dog-tag decorations, stood as a poignant reminder of why we were fighting. A hush fell over the crowd as I entered. Some faces I recognized from my own recovery journey. Others were new to me but familiar in their determination, the same look I'd seen on soldiers facing impossible odds. Cooper met me at the door, clasping my shoulder briefly. "Full house," he said, "and more coming. Word spread fast." "Any sign of trouble?" I scanned the room for unfamiliar faces that might be reporting back to my parents. 2 guys tried to get in claiming to be vets, couldn't answer basic questions about service. Cooper's expression hardened. We escorted them out. Politely. Thomas Brennan emerged from the crowd, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. "Captain?" He greeted me, then gestured to his companion. "This is Diane Mercer, investigative reporter with the Tribune. She specializes in nonprofit accountability." I assessed the reporter carefully. Early 50s, sharp eyes, the no-nonsense posture. Of someone who didn't suffer fools. "Ms. Mercer, I wasn't expecting press." "That's usually when you get the best stories," she replied with a hint of a smile. "Mr. Brennan says you have evidence of fraud at a major veterans charity. I'm interested." Before I could respond, the door opened again and Marcus entered, accompanied by Jamie Wilson. His expression told me immediately that something had happened. "What's wrong?" I asked as they approached. "The emergency hearing got moved up," Jamie explained, her voice low. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Judge Harrington's court." Harrington. The name struck like a physical blow. "Dad's golf buddy?" Marcus nodded grimly. "The very one. Uncle Stephen's petition is being fast-tracked. They're seeking an emergency conservatorship over both of us, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" "Acute shared psychosis precipitated by post-traumatic stress," Jamie quoted. "They've submitted affidavits from 3 psychiatrists who have never examined either of you but are willing to testify about typical patterns of delusional behavior in trauma survivors." My jaw tightened. "Can they do that?" "Technically, no. You're entitled to independent evaluation. But Harrington has wide latitude in emergency situations, and your parents' lawyers are painting this as urgent to prevent irreparable harm to the foundation and its beneficiaries." I processed this information quickly, adjusting my mental timeline. "So we've got tonight to make our case public before they potentially silence us legally tomorrow." Jamie nodded. "Essentially, yes. If the conservatorship is granted, even temporarily, they could prevent you from speaking about foundation matters, freeze your remaining assets, and potentially even restrict your movement." I turned to the reporter. "Still interested in that story, Ms. Mercer?" Her eyes had sharpened at the legal discussion. "More than ever." "Good," I said, making a decision. "You'll get exclusive access to our documentation, but first, I need you to witness something." I gestured toward the room full of veterans. The real impact of what my parents have done. Cooper called the meeting to order with a sharp whistle that cut through the murmuring conversations. All right, people. You all know why we're here. The foundation that promised to have our backs has been stealing from us instead. Captain Reeves is going to lay it out, then we're going to figure out what we do about it. As I took the podium, I felt a familiar calm settle over me, the same focus that had carried me through firefights and ambushes. I scanned the room, making eye contact with as many veterans as possible. I'm not going to waste your time with speeches, I began. You've all heard enough empty words from the foundation. Instead, I'm going to show you exactly what's been happening to the money that was supposed to help you. For the next 20 minutes, I presented the evidence we'd gathered, projection screens showing foundation financial records side by side with the reality of underfunded programs. Each slide prompted murmurs of recognition or outrage from the assembled veterans. Housing. Assistance program, I said, highlighting a line item. $8 million raised specifically for transitional housing for homeless veterans. Actual expenditure on housing, less than $1 million. The rest, administrative expenses that somehow funded renovations to my parents' vacation home in the Outer Banks. A man stood up near the back, older, Vietnam era. They told me that program was at capacity when I applied last year. Spent the winter in my car. PTSD treatment initiative, I continued, changing the slide. $5 million raised, including Senator Gardner's $250,000 donation. Actual services provided. 12 veterans received 8 therapy sessions each. Total cost, roughly $50,000. A woman in the second row shook her head in disgust. They made me do a photo shoot for their brochure, said I was a success story from that program. I never got a single session. One by one, veterans stood to share their experiences, promised help that never materialized, paperwork that disappeared, runarounds that left them worse off than before. The reporter moved through the crowd, recording statements and taking names. With each testimony, the anger in the room grew more palpable. Finally, Cooper returned to the podium. The foundation's claiming they're pulling our funding because we mismanaged it. Truth is, Veterans Haven has been operating mostly on donations from the community and volunteers. The foundation money dried up months ago, but they kept using our name in their materials. They're trying to shut us down permanently, I added. Not because we failed, but because we succeeded despite them. Because we're a threat to their narrative. A Marine veteran with prosthetic legs spoke up from the front row. So what's the plan, Captain? We're not just here to complain, right? No, we're not, I agreed. Tomorrow morning, my parents are trying to have me and my brother declared mentally incompetent to prevent us from exposing their fraud. If they succeed, everything we've uncovered could be dismissed as delusions. Outraged murmurs swept through the room. But they've overlooked something critical, I continued. They can try to silence me and Marcus, but they can't silence all of you. Each of you has a story that proves the Foundation's failures. Together, those stories create a pattern that can't be explained away. I outlined the strategy. Veterans would submit sworn statements about their experiences with the Foundation, creating a public record too substantial to dismiss. Those willing would attend tomorrow's hearing, presenting a visible reminder of who was really being harmed. They're counting on this remaining a private family matter, I explained. They want a narrative where I'm just a troubled veteran with a grudge. We need to show that this is about accountability for all veterans, not just my personal story. As the meeting progressed to logistics, I stepped aside with the reporter and Brennan. Ms. Mercer, I'm giving you full access to our documentation on the condition that your story runs tomorrow morning before the hearing. She raised an eyebrow. That's an aggressive timeline. We're facing an aggressive opponent, I replied. My parents are planning to use the legal system to bury this story. Once it's public, it becomes much harder for a judge to issue a gag order without appearing to participate in a cover-up. I'll need verification on all of this, she said, gesturing to the thumb drive I'd handed her. Marcus will walk you through it tonight, I assured her. Financial records, donor statements, internal emails, it's all there. As Mercer left with Marcus to begin working on the story, Brennan pulled me aside. There's something else you should know. Your father's accelerated the Westlake deal. They're trying to close it tomorrow afternoon instead of after the holidays. My pulse quickened. Can they do that without board approval? They're claiming the emergency committee they formed has authority to act on behalf of the full board during the leadership crisis. Brennan's expression was grim. Once those foundation assets are converted to Westlake Holdings, they'll be nearly impossible to recover. I processed this new information quickly. We need to stop that transaction. How? Even with the story breaking tomorrow, legal proceedings could take months. The money will be long gone. I considered our options, then reached a decision that had been forming in the back of my mind since this began. We need to talk to Senator Gardner. Tonight. Brennan looked surprised. The senator? At this hour? His donation was specifically diverted to the Westlake project. If he knows his money meant for PTSD treatment is being used for a real estate deal instead, he has standing to file an immediate injunction. It's risky. Gardner and your father have a relationship. He might side with Richard. It's a risk we have to take, I replied. Gardner chairs the Veterans Affairs Committee. His reputation is built on advocating for veterans. If this goes public with his donation involved, he'll want to be on the right side of it. Brennan made a call, stepping away to speak privately. When he returned, his expression had shifted. Gardner's at a fundraiser at the Willard Hotel. He's agreed to meet us in his suite afterward, 11 o'clock. I checked my watch. Just over 2 hours. I need to change and prepare our presentation. I'll drive, Brennan offered. My security team will ensure we aren't followed. As the meeting at Veterans Haven concluded, Cooper approached me with a list of veterans who had volunteered to attend the hearing. 30 so far, he said. More texting by the minute. Word spreading through every VFW and American Legion. Post in the area. I scanned the names, recognizing several from my rehabilitation days. This is exactly what we need, Coop. Real veterans with real stories. What can I do about this? He handed me the eviction notice that had been served to Veterans Haven. We've got guys staying here who have nowhere else to go. I studied the document, noting the legal justifications cited. Stall them. Request a formal hearing. Challenge the foundation's standing to evict given the ongoing investigation. Jamie will help with the specifics. Cooper's weathered face showed his concern. And if that doesn't work? Then we find another building, I said with more confidence than I felt. But first, let's win tomorrow's battle. As I left, veterans approached one by one, shaking my hand, sharing additional details about their experiences with the foundation, offering their support. One older veteran, who introduced himself as a former Army medic, pressed something into my palm. For courage, he said softly. I opened my hand to find a tarnished set of combat medic pins. I can't take these, I protested. You're treating wounds that need healing, he replied simply. Different battlefield, same mission. I closed my fingers around the pins, feeling their weight, the weight of trust placed in me by my fellow veterans. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would not let them down again. In the car with Brennan, heading toward the Willard Hotel, I mentally prepared for our meeting with Senator Gardner. This wasn't just another board presentation or financial briefing. This was the moment our private battle would intersect with political power. Power that could either accelerate our cause or crush it completely. My parents had taught me to navigate the social hierarchies of wealth and influence, lessons I'd largely ignored in favor of direct military service. Now I would use those same lessons against them, speaking the language of power and consequences that William Gardner would understand. The snow was falling more heavily now. Washington's monuments ghostly silhouettes behind a veil of white. Tomorrow would be Christmas Eve, a time for family gatherings and celebration. Instead, I would be in a courtroom, fighting for my legal autonomy against the very people who had given me life. The irony wasn't lost on me. But then, family had always been complicated, a truth that applied to blood relations and battle brothers alike. The difference was that in combat, you learned quickly who would have your back when it mattered. And tonight, surrounded by veterans fighting alongside me, I finally understood what family truly meant. The Willard Hotel stood like a fortress in the falling snow, its historic facade illuminated by golden lights that pushed back against the winter darkness. Inside, the lobby bustled with holiday travelers and well-dressed guests attending various functions, oblivious to the battle I was waging. Brennan guided me through the crowd with practiced efficiency, bypassing the main elevators for a service corridor that led to a private elevator. Gardner's security prefers this route, he explained as he swiped an access card. The senator's suite occupied a corner of the 9th floor with views of the White House in the distance. A stone-faced security officer checked our IDs before allowing us inside, where the opulence of old Washington awaited: ornate moldings, antique furniture, and the unmistakable atmosphere of power. Senator William Gardner rose from behind a desk, strewn with papers, his silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour. At 68, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference, though the slight stoop in his shoulders hinted at the burden of his responsibilities. "Captain Reeves," he greeted me, extending his hand. "I've heard a great deal about you, from your father primarily." I shook his hand firmly. "I suspect what you've heard recently and what I'm about to tell you will differ significantly, Senator." He gestured toward a seating area where a staff member had arranged coffee and water. "That's what intrigues me. Richard Reeves has been a valuable ally on veterans' issues for years. Yet here you are, suggesting improprieties. Please, enlighten me." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the evidence methodically: the financial discrepancies, the misallocated funds, the pattern of exploitation. I focused specifically on the senator's donation and its diversion to the Westlake Project. Your $250,000 contribution, earmarked exclusively for PTSD treatment programs, was never used for that purpose, I explained, showing him the internal document with my father's instruction to reallocate to Westlake Preliminary. Gardner's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened as he studied the evidence. "And Westlake is?" "A commercial real estate development," Brennan supplied. "Mixed-use property that the foundation is investing in through a subsidiary. 0 veteran services involved." Gardner set down the documents and removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Captain, these are serious allegations against respected pillars of the philanthropic community. What exactly are you asking of me?" "2 things, Senator," I replied. "First, as the donor whose funds were explicitly misappropriated, you have standing to request an immediate injunction preventing the Westlake transaction from closing tomorrow. And second, your presence, or that of a senior staff member, at tomorrow's conservatorship hearing. My parents are attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent to prevent this evidence from becoming public." The senator's eyebrows rose. "A convenient diagnosis." "Convenient for them, yes," I agreed. "Less so for the veterans who will continue to be exploited if they succeed." Gardner was silent for a long moment, studying me with the practiced eye of a career politician assessing risks and advantages. "You understand this puts me in a difficult position. Your father has been instrumental in fundraising for veterans. Legislation. If these allegations prove unfounded—" "They aren't," I interrupted firmly. "And with respect, Senator, your reputation as a veterans advocate is at stake. When this becomes public, and it will, the question will be whether you acted to protect veterans or the people defrauding them." His eyes narrowed slightly at my directness. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Captain." "Not a threat," I corrected. A reality. The Tribune is running a story tomorrow morning detailing the foundation's misuse of funds. 30 veterans will be at the courthouse with sworn statements about services promised but never delivered. This isn't going away. Gardner rose and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered city. I recognized the posture, a commander considering options, weighing consequences. "Your father called me yesterday," he said finally. "Warned me you might approach me with disturbing conspiracy theories. Said your combat trauma had unfortunately affected your perception of reality." I felt Brennan tense beside me, but kept my own expression neutral. "And what do you think, Senator?" He turned, his expression unreadable. "I think combat changes people. I've seen it firsthand with my own son, but it also reveals character rather than creating it." He returned to his desk and pressed an intercom button. "Jessica, get me Judge Carrington at home, please." "Yes, I realize the hour. Tell her it's regarding an emergency injunction." Relief washed through me, though I maintained my composure. Gardner looked up at me with newfound respect. "Judge Carrington owes me a favor. She'll issue a temporary restraining order preventing any transactions involving foundation assets until these allegations can be properly investigated." "Thank you, Senator." He held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. This temporary measure buys you 24 hours at most. As for tomorrow's hearing," he paused, considering, "my chief counsel will attend as an interested party, given my standing as a donor whose funds were potentially misused." It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was enough to begin shifting the balance of power. The Westlake transaction would be delayed, and the senator's counsel at the hearing would signal that this wasn't merely a family disagreement. As we prepared to leave, Gardner fixed me with a penetrating gaze. "You realize your parents won't forgive this." "With respect, Senator, this isn't about forgiveness. It's about accountability." "Indeed." He nodded thoughtfully. "I've always found it interesting how rarely those two virtues coexist." Back in Brennan's car, the tension I'd been holding finally released. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash following intense focus. Brennan noticed, but said nothing, allowing me the quiet moment I needed. My phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "Reporter working through the night. Story filed for 6 a.m. web posting. Print edition confirmed." Everything was in motion now. In less than 12 hours, the carefully constructed facade my parents had built would begin to crumble. The foundation's misdeeds would be exposed, and with the senator's injunction in place, they couldn't rush to hide the evidence. Yet as we drove through the silent, snow-covered streets, a strange melancholy settled over me. Tomorrow's victory, if it came, would forever alter my relationship with my parents. The final remnants of the family I had once known would dissolve, replaced by legal battles and public recriminations. Brennan seemed to sense my thoughts. "Second thoughts, Captain?" "No," I replied honestly, "just recognizing the cost." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The hardest fights are always the ones closest to home." As we approached my apartment building, I spotted an unfamiliar car, parked across the street, dark sedan, engine running despite the late hour. Brennan noticed it too, his posture immediately alert. "Someone's watching your place," he said quietly, driving past without slowing. "My parents? Possibly. Or someone they hired. Either way, you shouldn't go home tonight." I didn't argue. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, I'd learned to recognize surveillance when I saw it. "Where then?" "I have a safe house in Arlington. We'll go there, regroup in the morning before the hearing." As Brennan changed routes, I watched the city lights blur through the falling snow. In 12 hours, I would face my parents across a courtroom. In 12 hours, everything would change. The question was no longer whether I would win this battle. The question was what would remain when the smoke cleared. Dawn broke pale and tentative over Arlington, the sun struggling to penetrate the gray December sky. I stood at the window of Brennan's safe house, a nondescript townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, watching the street for any sign of surveillance. The night had passed in fitful bursts of sleep, interrupted by strategy sessions and last-minute preparations. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. Marcus had sent a link with the UI's simple message, "It's live." The Tribune's headline was stark against the white background. Betrayal of Trust: How Patriot Partners Foundation Exploited Veterans While Enriching Founders. The reporter, Diane Mercer, had done thorough work. The article methodically outlined the Foundation's misdeeds, supported by financial records, veterans' testimonials, and internal documents. My parents were quoted as declining to comment on ongoing family matters, their silence damning in contrast to the detailed evidence presented. Within minutes, notifications began flooding my phone as other news outlets picked up the story. Local television stations led their morning broadcasts with the scandal. The Foundation's social media accounts were inundated with questions and outrage from donors and supporters. The dam had broken. "How are you holding up?" Brennan asked, offering a cup of coffee as he joined me at the window. "Ready to finish this," I replied, accepting the cup. The warmth seeped into my fingers, a small comfort before the storm ahead. Text from Jamie confirmed that Judge Carrington had issued the temporary restraining order overnight, blocking any transactions involving Foundation assets. Senator Gardner's chief counsel would meet us at the courthouse. Everything was proceeding according to plan, yet the knot in my stomach tightened as 9 a.m. approached. "Your parents won't go down without a fight," Brennan warned as we prepared to leave. "This hearing could get ugly." "It was always going to be ugly," I replied, straightening my blazer and checking my reflection. I had chosen my outfit carefully: conservative navy suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a neat bun. The image of stability and control, the opposite of the unstable veteran my parents had portrayed. Outside the courthouse, the scene that greeted us exceeded my expectations. At least 50 veterans had gathered despite the cold, many in partial uniform displaying their service branches. Cooper stood at the center, organizing them into a respectful formation. News vans lined the street, reporters preparing for live updates. "Quite the turnout," Marcus observed, joining us at the base of the courthouse steps. He looked exhausted but determined, the weight of betrayal evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "They're not here for us," I reminded him. "They're here for each other, for the truth." As we climbed the steps, veterans called out words of encouragement. "Give 'em hell, Captain." "We got your 6. The support bolstered my resolve, reminding me why this fight mattered beyond my personal vindication. Inside, the hallway outside courtroom 3 was already crowded with reporters, legal teams, and the curious public drawn by the morning's headlines. Senator Gardner's chief counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Leslie Kwan, intercepted us before we reached the doors. "Senator Gardner sends his regards," she said crisply. We filed a motion to intervene, citing the senator's standing as a defrauded donor. Judge Harrington wasn't pleased, but he couldn't deny our right to be heard. Jamie joined us, her expression cautiously optimistic. The Tribune article changed the landscape. Judge Harrington's wife called him at breakfast, asking if he knew about the scandal. His clerk told me he's been fielding calls all morning from other judges who've donated to the foundation. The courtroom doors opened at 8:55, and we filed in to find it already nearly full. My parents sat at the front with their legal team, 4 attorneys from one of Washington's most prestigious firms. My father's back was rigid with tension, but my mother turned briefly as we entered, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. Judge Harrington entered promptly at 9 a.m., his expression grave. Despite his friendship with my father, the public scrutiny now focused on this case clearly weighed on him. He called the court to order with a sharp bang of his gavel. "Before we begin," he announced, I want to make it clear that this court is aware of the media attention surrounding this case. However, we will proceed based on legal standards, not public opinion or unverified allegations. My parents' lead attorney rose first, a silver-haired man named Philip Thornton, whose reputation for aggressive litigation preceded him. Your Honor, this hearing concerns a straightforward matter of mental competency. We have substantial evidence that Cassandra and Marcus Reeves are suffering from a shared psychotic disorder that has led them to make disturbing and unfounded accusations against their parents. He presented affidavits from psychiatrists who had never examined us, but offered opinions based on behavioral patterns consistent with trauma-induced paranoia. He emphasized my military service and injuries not as achievements, but as the source of my supposed instability. This is not about silencing criticism, Thornton concluded smoothly. This is about protecting two troubled individuals from causing further harm to themselves and others while they receive the treatment they desperately need. When our turn came, Jamie approached the bench with quiet confidence. Your Honor, the petition before you is not a good faith effort to address mental health concerns. It is a transparent attempt to silence whistleblowers who have uncovered significant financial improprieties at Patriot Partners Foundation. She presented Dr. Patel's comprehensive assessment of my cognitive function, followed by an equally thorough evaluation of Marcus from an independent psychiatrist. Both reports concluded that we were fully competent, showing no signs of delusion or impaired judgment. Furthermore, Jamie continued, we have evidence that the petitioners have engaged in a systematic campaign to discredit Ms. Reeves, including filing a false complaint against her treating physician and attempting to compromise her financial independence. The morning unfolded in a series of legal arguments and counter-arguments. Senator Gardner's counsel presented the misappropriation of his donation as evidence that our allegations had merit and were not the product of shared delusion. Veterans submitted sworn statements about promises made and broken by the foundation. Throughout it all, I maintained rigid control over my emotions, even as my father took the stand to describe me as a changed person after my injury, prone to conspiracy theories, and unable to distinguish between reality and her own distorted perceptions. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the witness stand with measured steps, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. I swore to tell the truth, then faced my parents directly for the first time since our confrontation in the boardroom. Captain Reeves, Judge Harrington began, his use of my military title a subtle shift from earlier. Your parents have expressed deep concern about your mental state. What would you like the court to understand about your actions? I took a measured breath. Your Honor, my parents have constructed an elaborate narrative about my mental stability to distract from a simple truth. Patriot Partners Foundation, under their leadership, has systematically diverted millions of dollars meant for veteran services into private ventures that benefit them personally. I outlined the evidence dispassionately, pointing to specific transactions and board decisions that demonstrated the pattern of fraud. I explained how my military training in threat assessment and strategic analysis had actually equipped me to uncover these discrepancies. The foundation was created to serve veterans, I concluded. Instead, it has served my parents' ambitions at the expense of those who sacrificed for this country. My actions are not the result of trauma or delusion. They are the necessary response of someone who swore an oath to protect others from harm. The cross-examination was brutal. Thornton attempted to provoke an emotional reaction, questioning my motives, suggesting personal vendettas, even implying that my combat experiences had made me paranoid and vindictive. I maintained my composure, answering each accusation with factual clarity. By mid-afternoon, the mood in the courtroom had shifted perceptibly. Judge Harrington, despite his friendship with my father, appeared increasingly troubled by the evidence presented. The reporters scribbling notes seemed less interested in the mental competency claims and more focused on the financial documents being submitted into evidence. After a brief recess, Judge Harrington returned with his decision. The courtroom fell, silent as he cleared his throat. This court finds no compelling evidence that either Cassandra or Marcus Reeves lacks the mental capacity to manage their own affairs, he stated firmly. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Relief washed through me, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, given the serious nature of the allegations regarding Patriot Partners Foundation, I am ordering a full forensic audit of the organization's finances and referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. My father's face had gone ashen. My mother stared straight ahead, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Finally, the judge concluded, the temporary restraining order preventing any transactions involving foundation assets will remain in effect pending the outcome of these investigations. The gavel fell with finality, and the courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement. As my parents conferred urgently with their legal team, Cooper approached with a group of veterans. It's not over, he warned, but it's a damn good start. Outside, the gathered veterans greeted the news with restrained cheers. The media swarmed for statements, but I deflected most questions, keeping the focus on the Foundation's mission rather than the family drama. It wasn't until later that evening, as Marcus and I sat in my newly secured apartment reviewing the day's events, that the true impact began to sink in. The Foundation was under investigation. My parents faced potential criminal charges. The structure they had built over decades was crumbling. What happens now? Marcus asked, his voice heavy with the emotional toll of the day. Now we rebuild, I replied. The Foundation needs new leadership, new transparency, new commitment to actually serving veterans. And Mom and Dad? I was quiet for a moment. They'll fight the investigation. They'll try to maintain control, but too many people know the truth now. 3 days later, on Christmas morning, I received the news I had been working toward. My parents, facing overwhelming evidence and the defection of key allies, had resigned from the Foundation. The board had appointed an interim director, a respected veteran advocate with no ties to the Reeves family, while a search for permanent leadership was conducted. That afternoon, I visited Veterans Haven, bringing news that the eviction notice had been rescinded and their funding restored. Cooper had organized a small Christmas gathering for veterans who had nowhere else to go. The tree with its dog tag ornaments gleamed with added lights, and someone had arranged donated gifts beneath it. As I helped serve the holiday meal, a young veteran I didn't recognize approached hesitantly. Captain Reeves? I just wanted to say, thanks. I applied for housing assistance through the Foundation 3 times and got nowhere. This morning, I got a call saying my application was approved. I'll have a place next month. His words were the first tangible evidence that our fight had made a real difference. The Foundation, under new leadership, was already beginning to fulfill its promises. Later, as I prepared to leave, Cooper handed me an envelope. Special delivery, he said. Came by courier an hour ago. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. Just 3 lines. Some wars leave no victors, only survivors. I hope someday you'll understand why we did what we did. Until then, goodbye. No apology, no admission, just a final attempt to reframe their actions as necessary or justified. I folded the note and tucked it away, neither surprised nor particularly hurt by its contents. My parents had cut me off for being worthless, damaged goods returning from war, inconvenient to their narrative of success. They had never expected me to fight back with the very skills that combat had taught me: strategic thinking, perseverance, and the unshakable loyalty to those left behind. In the end, I hadn't just bought their company. I had reclaimed its purpose, redirecting resources back to the veterans who had earned them through sacrifice. As I drove home through the quiet Christmas evening, snow beginning to fall in gentle flakes, I felt neither triumph nor regret, but something more complex. The weight of duty fulfilled, and the lightness of a burden finally set down. My war wasn't over, but the most important battle had been won. not for revenge, but for restoration. Not for power, but for purpose. And for the first time since returning home, I felt truly at peace with who I had become. Not damaged, not worthless, but stronger in the broken places. If you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or told you were worthless, I hope this story reminds you of your own strength. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles others never expected you to fight. Remember, when people try to write you out of your own story, you don't just have to accept their version, you can rewrite the ending. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience, accountability, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Each of you has a story that deserves to be heard, and together, we create a community that understands the true value of supporting one another. Subscribe now, and join me on this journey of reclaiming our narratives, one story at a time.